Look at you trying to fly first class? You look like a monkey." The words exploded through Terminal C like a slap. Every head turned, phones lifted, and the silence that followed was sharper than the insult itself. At the check-in counter stood a woman in a bright orange blazer, calm as stone. She did not flinch. The flight attendant in red leaned forward, finger inches from her face, feeding on the laughter of a few bystanders. But one thing none of them knew, this quiet traveler, was the reason their entire airline existed. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we are glad you are here. Now, back to her. Security was already on its way. The attendant's voice cracked with false authority. "People like you abuse our system," she barked. The crowd shifted, uncertain whether to intervene or record. The black woman's name was Naomi Ellis, founder of Ellis Global Holdings, the company funding $1 billion of annual airline support program. But today, she chose invisibility, jeans, flats, no assistant, no visible power. Naomi looked at the woman's badge slowly, memorizing each letter, her breath steady, her eyes unmoved. "You just made a very expensive mistake," she said, voice soft but anchored. The attendant laughed. "Is that a threat?" Naomi's reply was quieter still. "No, it is a fact." 2 gates away, a child asked his mother why the lady was being yelled at. The mother said nothing. Cameras were rolling now. Even the sound of luggage wheels seemed to stop. Naomi adjusted the strap of her bag, still poised, still dignified. "I will board when I am ready," she said. "You can call whoever you want." The attendant sneered. "Security will decide that." "Oh." As the officer approached, Naomi did not move an inch. Her stillness filled the terminal, the kind of stillness that made noise confess itself. Somewhere above the PA system, a boarding call echoed for Flight 631 to New York, her plane. No one knew yet that by the time that flight took off, careers would end, contracts would collapse, and $1 billion would vanish from the airline's books. Security reached the counter within seconds, the kind of hurry that makes guilt look official before truth even arrives. The officer's badge read Reed, a man in his late 30s with the calm of someone who had seen too many pointless escalations. He looked from the flight attendant to Naomi, then back again. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked. The attendant pointed, voice tight with fury. She tried to access a restricted gate, no valid ticket, no ID match, and she became aggressive. Naomi's tone stayed level. "I became still. That is not the same thing." Passengers nearby began to whisper. Some whispered the slur they had just heard, repeating it in disbelief. Others quietly lifted their phones higher. The tension was no longer confined to the counter. It spread outward like ripples under glass. Officer Reed turned to Naomi. "May I see your ID, ma'am?" Naomi handed it to him without a word. The attendant snatched it midair and said, "That is not real. I have seen this trick before." Reed frowned. "Ma'am, please step back." But she would not. Her certainty came from the crowd's silence. She believed they were on her side. They always were, until Truth walked in wearing an orange blazer. Naomi's voice carried steady authority. "If you check the barcode on that pass, you will find a security clearance marked EGH Executive. That is Ellis Global Holdings." The officer scanned it. The screen blinked green. The attendant froze. Naomi continued, her words deliberate. "Now, would you like to continue this conversation in front of the cameras or in your manager's office?" A hush swept through the terminal. Even the announcement seemed to fade. The bystanders who had been filming lowered their phones slightly, realizing this was not another viral meltdown. This was something larger. The attendant stammered, You people always fake these credentials." Naomi tilted her head. "You people?" The words landed like a hammer on marble. The officer's eyes narrowed. Around them, a wave of unease rippled through travelers of every color, every class. A man in line whispered, "That is not right." A woman near the gate whispered back, "She just said that out loud?" Naomi did not move. Her silence was not weakness. It was calculation. Every second she gave them was another inch of rope. Finally, she spoke. "You said I look like a monkey. Then you accused me of fraud. Now you are teaching this entire airport what systemic bias looks like in real time." Reed shifted his stance, realizing who he was protecting and who he was exposing. Ma'am, he said to Naomi, I think we should step aside for a moment. Naomi nodded. Yes, let us step aside. But as she turned, her phone vibrated. A single message from her assistant flashed across the screen. Board directors online, waiting for confirmation to suspend airline funding. Oh, Naomi looked up, calm and certain. Actually, she said, turning back to the attendant, we will handle this right here. The room seemed to hold its breath. The crowd leaned in. Justice, quiet but unmistakable, was already boarding. Naomi stood between the counter and the crowd, her presence cutting through the noise like a blade. The security officer stayed close, unsure whether he was protecting her or the employee who had started this mess. The flight attendant folded her arms, trying to look firm but trembling under the weight of too many eyes. Let me be clear, Naomi said, her voice steady and controlled. You called me a monkey, you accused me of fraud, and now you are standing in front of witnesses pretending this never happened. The attendant's jaw tightened. You misunderstood me. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Did I? From the corner of the terminal, a gate agent whispered to another employee. Is that the Ellis woman? The one who funds our operations? The second agent's eyes widened. It cannot be. Why would she fly commercial? The whispers grew louder, spreading like a storm about to break. Naomi heard them, but she did not turn. Her gaze stayed fixed on the woman behind the counter. Tell me, she said, what does a successful traveler look like to you? The attendant swallowed hard, words failing her for the first time. I did not mean. You meant every word, Naomi interrupted. You wanted to remind me of where you think I belong, but you have forgotten who decides where people belong. The officer shifted uncomfortably. He had seen conflict before, but never one that carried this kind of quiet power. Naomi's phone buzzed again. She lifted it, pressed the screen once, and spoke clearly. Rachel, confirm line connection. Her assistant's voice came through the speaker, crisp and calm. You are live with Ellis Global Holdings. The board is listening. The crowd went silent. Even the hum of the escalators seemed to stop. The attendant's face drained of color. Wait, what? Naomi stepped closer, not raising her voice but deepening her tone until it felt like authority itself. I am Naomi Ellis, Chief Executive Officer of Ellis Global Holdings, the same company that has supported this airline with $1 billion in annual infrastructure funding. And gasps rippled through the terminal. A man holding his phone whispered, Oh my God. Another passenger began filming again, whispering, This just turned real. Naomi continued, every syllable sharp as glass. You thought I was invisible because I was dressed like an ordinary woman. You thought power had a uniform. It does not. Power is how you treat people when you think they have none. The attendant tried to speak, but her voice broke. I did not know. That is the problem, Naomi replied. You never ask, you just assume. Rachel's voice came through again. Ma'am, the board requests your confirmation. Should we proceed with the suspension? Naomi looked around at the faces frozen in disbelief, the travelers, the staff, the guards, every one of them witnessing a quiet reckoning. Then she said, calm but absolute, proceed. A soft tone pinged from her phone as Rachel replied, confirmed. Airline funding suspended. The attendant stumbled backward. The officer exhaled, silent. Someone in the back began to clap, slowly at first, then louder, until the sound filled the terminal. Naomi did not smile. She simply said, This is not revenge, it is accountability. And with that, she picked up her boarding pass, turned toward Gate 34, and walked away. The terminal was no longer just a place of travel. It had become a courtroom of conscience. Naomi's calm stride cut through the crowd, every step echoing against polished tile. The passengers who had once watched in silence now followed her with their eyes, whispering fragments of disbelief and awe. Behind her, the flight attendant stood frozen at the counter, her confidence collapsing like paper under rain. The security officer, Reed, remained still, eyes lowered, processing what had just unfolded. The weight of a billion-dollar decision hung in the air, invisible but suffocating. A manager in a Navy suit hurried down the concourse, his badge glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. What is happening here? He demanded, his voice sharp, trying to reclaim authority that had already left the building. Naomi turned to face him. You are Mr. Dalton, correct? Regional Operations Manager. He blinked. Yes, but how do you? Because I signed your payroll structure 2 years ago. she said evenly. Now tell me, Mr. Dalton, what are your anti-bias protocols for frontline staff? The man hesitated. We conduct annual sensitivity training. Naomi's gaze did not waver. Once a year does not erase a lifetime of arrogance. He looked around, realizing dozens of phones were recording. His voice softened. Ma'am, perhaps we can move to a private area. No, Naomi interrupted. This began in public. It will end in public. The attendant whispered, I never meant. Naomi turned back to her, eyes steady. You meant to humiliate me. You just did not expect the audience to change sides. Gasps rippled again through the crowd. A young woman near the gate airport staff in a junior uniform stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her voice carried conviction. I heard her, the woman said. She used that word twice. Dalton's expression hardened with embarrassment. Miss Lewis, that is not necessary. It is, the young employee replied, because silence is the reason this keeps happening. Naomi nodded slowly, acknowledging the courage it took for that voice to rise. Thank you, she said, her tone soft but commanding. You are the reason I still believe change is possible. Dalton's phone buzzed. He looked down, and the blood drained from his face. The airline board is requesting immediate clarification. They are saying corporate funding has been cut. Naomi's response was precise. Not cut, redirected, until systemic reform is proven. Oh. The entire terminal seemed to pause again. Somewhere in the distance, a boarding announcement stumbled mid-sentence before resuming in a shaking voice. Naomi took one final look at the woman who had mocked her. You called me a monkey, she said quietly, but let me tell you what you really saw. You saw your own reflection powerless, afraid, desperate to feel above someone. That is not who I am. That is who you are. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. The truth had already filled every corner of the terminal. Naomi adjusted her blazer, nodded to Officer Reed, and walked toward the boarding gate. The crowd parted instinctively, as though dignity itself required space to pass. She did not look back. The cameras did that for her. The internet would do the rest. Naomi's heels clicked against the floor like a metronome of control. Each sound measured, deliberate, the rhythm of someone who had walked through storms and refused to bow. The gate corridor ahead was lined with passengers waiting to board, their murmurs folding into a single wave of stunned silence as she approached. Every camera lens tilted in her direction, but she walked as if no one existed except truth itself. The airline's regional director, Martin Hale, intercepted her near Gate 34. His smile was rehearsed, the kind that executives wear when they are 2 seconds away from panic. Miss Ellis, please let us talk privately. This is clearly a misunderstanding, he began. Naomi stopped just short of him. A misunderstanding is when you spill coffee. This, she gestured back toward the crowd at the counter, is a culture. Martin exhaled, lowering his voice. We will launch an internal review immediately. You will not, Naomi said. You will receive an independent investigation led by my firm. I built your safety systems. I know every level of your chain of command. Do not insult me with paperwork disguised as progress. The director's face twitched, struggling to maintain composure. Please, the public does not need... Naomi interrupted, her tone sharpening. The public already knows. They were standing 10 feet away. At that moment, a child tugged on her mother's sleeve nearby. Mom, is she the lady they yelled at? He whispered. His mother nodded, eyes wide. Yes, baby, and now they are learning who they yelled at. Oh. Naomi turned toward the boarding bridge where the sign above flashed Flight 631 to New York. Delayed. She smiled faintly. Of course it is delayed, she murmured. Justice always slows traffic. The passengers laughed softly, not mocking but relieved. Someone had finally said what everyone felt. Her phone vibrated again. Rachel's voice came through her earpiece. Naomi, your statement is trending globally. Hashtag Flight 31 is already at 8 million views. Media requests are flooding in. Naomi's expression remained unreadable. Do not respond yet, she said. Let them talk. Let the truth travel on its own. Behind her, the young employee, Miss Lewis, hurried closer. Miss Ellis, she said quietly, thank you for standing up. I have seen things like this happen before, and no one ever says anything. Naomi turned, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. Then promise me something, she said. Next time, you say something. Power is not a position. It is a choice. Tears welled in the young woman's eyes. "I will," she whispered. Martin Hale tried one last time. "Miss Ellis, we can fix this. The company values diversity. Please reconsider the funding decision." Naomi faced him squarely. "You want diversity because it looks good in a brochure. I want justice because it saves lives." The terminal erupted into quiet applause, again hesitant at first, then rising, echoing through the gate. Naomi adjusted her blazer once more and stepped toward the jet bridge. Her voice, low but clear, carried over the clapping. "I am not here for revenge. I am here to make sure no one else has to buy a ticket to humiliation." With that, she handed her boarding pass to the stunned gate agent, looked straight into the nearest camera lens, and said the words that would replay around the world. "Dignity is not a luxury seat. It is the ground we all walk on." The cabin lights flickered softly as Naomi entered the plane. Conversations hushed like a switch had been flipped. Even those who did not know who she was could feel that something had shifted in the air. The kind of silence that follows power when it walks into a room unannounced. The flight attendants along the aisle stiffened, pretending not to notice, but their eyes betrayed them. Whispers spread faster than the air conditioner's hum. One voice murmured, "That is her, the woman from the terminal." Another added, "They said she owns the funding for the whole airline." Naomi placed her carry-on in the overhead compartment, calm, precise, without hurry. Across from her, a man in a business suit lowered his newspaper and studied her face with quiet respect. "They were wrong to treat you that way," he said softly. Naomi looked at him for a moment. "They did not just treat me that way," she replied. "They treated everyone watching that way. Bias does not humiliate one person, it poisons a culture." The man nodded slowly. "I suppose today was their lesson." Naomi's tone stayed even. "Lessons are optional. Accountability is not." As she sat down, a second flight attendant approached nervously, her name tag reading J. Miller. "Miss Ellis, I want to apologize on behalf of our team," she stammered. Naomi's eyes met hers. "Then do it on behalf of yourself," she said gently. "Apologies mean most when they are personal." Miller swallowed and nodded. "You are right, ma'am. I was near the gate. I heard everything. It was wrong." Naomi's expression softened. "What did you do when you heard it?" The attendant hesitated. "I froze." "Then next time do not," Naomi replied. "Do not let silence do the talking for you." A seatbelt chime sounded, breaking the tension. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but heavy with unease. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We will be experiencing a brief delay due to operational changes. Thank you for your patience." The passengers exchanged looks. Everyone knew what those operational changes really were. The news of Naomi's announcement had already reached corporate headquarters. Entire divisions were scrambling. Naomi opened her tablet and read the incoming messages, statements from civil rights organizations, journalists, and even government officials. Words like dignity, bias, and power glowed across the screen. She scrolled once, then closed it quietly. Across the aisle, the same child from the terminal looked up at her, eyes wide. "Did you win?" he asked. Naomi smiled faintly. "It is not about winning, sweetheart. It is about waking people up." The boy nodded, still processing her words. "My mom said you are brave." Naomi turned her head toward the window, watching a fuel truck roll slowly along the tarmac. "Bravery is doing what is right when comfort would be easier," she said softly. Outside, the sky was beginning to dim toward evening. The runway lights glowed like small promises, guiding everything forward. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the hum beneath her seat, a steady reminder that movement always follows stillness. When she opened them again, she whispered to herself, "Let them feel what silence sounds like when it is not fear but strength." The engines roared to life. The flight crew avoided her gaze, each of them aware that the woman sitting in 2 amperes had just rewritten the meaning of power at 30,000 feet before even leaving the ground. The plane taxied slowly, its engines humming beneath a tension that felt almost human. Naomi sat upright in seat 2 amperes, her hands resting lightly on her lap. She could feel eyes on her from every direction, the curious, the ashamed, and the awakened. No one dared to speak, yet the silence was full of confession. From the cockpit, the captain's voice returned, smoother this time, rehearsed but uncertain. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience." His tone wavered, as though he knew exactly who was sitting a few feet behind the door. The flight attendant Miller reappeared with a glass of water. "Ma'am, can I offer you something else?" Naomi shook her head gently. "You can offer me fairness. That will be enough." Ugh. Miller swallowed hard and nodded, stepping aside. Across the aisle, a passenger finally spoke up, a woman in her 40s, wearing a navy scarf. "I watched everything at the gate," she said. "What they did to you was disgusting." Naomi looked over calmly. "Thank you for saying that. Most people see it and turn away." The woman frowned. "Because we are taught to avoid conflict." Naomi's gaze softened. "Avoiding conflict does not keep peace. It just protects injustice." The woman nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "I will remember that." Behind them, a man in a business suit whispered to his colleague, "She just froze their funding, an entire $1 billion." The words rolled through the cabin like a quiet shockwave. Naomi caught the echo but did not react. She simply adjusted her seatbelt and exhaled, eyes fixed on the runway. The hum of the engines deepened, and the cabin vibrated with the kind of energy that mirrors human emotion, part fear, part awe. At the back of the plane, Miller stopped to whisper to her colleague, "I cannot believe she is still flying with us after what happened." Her colleague replied under his breath, "She could have destroyed us with one call." Naomi heard them. She did not turn. Her voice carried back anyway, calm and deliberate. "I did not destroy you. I just removed what should never have been built on disrespect." The air went still again. Even the sound of zippers and safety belts paused. A few rows ahead, a teenage girl lifted her phone and whispered to her friend, "That is her, the CEO." She did not record. She simply watched, almost reverent. Naomi looked out the window again. The sky had turned a bruised shade of blue. Clouds hung low like witnesses who had seen too much. Her reflection stared back at her, a reminder of how often strength must wear silence as armor. Her phone vibrated once more. Rachel's voice came through, quiet but urgent. "Naomi, news networks are calling this the Ellis Protocol. They are saying your response could change how corporations handle discrimination claims." Naomi's voice was calm. "Let them name it whatever they need to. I only wanted one thing, to remind the world that humanity cannot be outsourced to policy." Rachel paused, her tone softening. "They are already asking for interviews." "Not yet," Naomi said. "Let the story breathe. Truth deserves silence before applause." Oh. She ended the call and folded her hands again. The plane began its takeoff roll, engines roaring, cabin trembling. Naomi felt the lift press against her chest, the same pressure she had felt her entire life, the fight to rise against weight unseen. As the plane climbed into the sky, she whispered under her breath, not for the cameras, not for the headlines, but for herself. Elevation is never granted. It is earned inch by inch. And with that, the clouds swallowed the light, and the woman they had mocked only an hour earlier became the storm that would rewrite how the world defines respect. The plane leveled at 35,000 feet, cutting through clouds the color of smoke. Cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber, but the atmosphere still pulsed with tension. Naomi stared out the window, her reflection faint against the endless sky. The storm below was fading, but inside, the reckoning had only begun. The captain's voice returned, calm but laced with unease. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached cruising altitude. You are free to move about the cabin." He paused, just a moment too long, before continuing. "On behalf of the crew, we thank you for choosing Horizon Air." Naomi caught the irony. Horizon Air. The same brand that now hung by a thread of accountability. A man 2 rows ahead turned in his seat, voice hesitant but sincere. "Miss Ellis, I just wanted to say, what you did out there, it mattered." Naomi's tone was gentle. "Then make sure it still matters tomorrow." He nodded, eyes lowering, unsure how to respond. Further down the aisle, the junior attendant Miller whispered to her coworker, "She is right there, the CEO." Her coworker, pale from stress, whispered back, "Do not even look at her wrong. Headquarters just issued an emergency compliance order. Everyone is on alert." Naomi heard it, but she kept her focus on the horizon beyond the glass. The clouds thinned, revealing streaks of golden light like quiet forgiveness. For a moment, she thought of her mother, who had once said, "They will try to shrink you with words, grow so large that their vocabulary fails." She inhaled slowly. The memory steadied her more than any apology could. Across the aisle, The boy who had spoken earlier peeked over the armrest again. "Miss, is the plane safe now?" Naomi smiled faintly. "It is safer than it was an hour ago." His mother smiled, whispering, "Thank you for standing tall for all of us." Naomi looked at her and said softly, "I do not stand tall. I just refuse to bow." The words hung in the air like a prayer no one wanted to disturb. In the galley, the purser was on the phone with headquarters, his face tight. "Yes, she is on board. Yes, she confirmed the funding suspension. No, I do not think she is bluffing." He glanced toward Naomi, his voice dropping. "She is calm. Too calm. That is what scares me." Rachel's message buzzed across Naomi's tablet again. Major networks broadcasting live reaction. Stock price dropping 5% in first hour. Naomi tapped the message once, replying silently, "Let it drop. It will rise on truth." She closed the tablet and folded her hands. For the first time that day, her heartbeat slowed. The chaos had done its job. Now came the silence that builds something new. She whispered to herself, "They thought I was angry. I was never angry. I was awake." Outside, the sky broke open into a wash of sunlight, spilling over the wings like grace itself. In row 6, a passenger quietly began to clap. Another joined, then another. It was not applause for entertainment, it was recognition. Naomi did not turn. She did not bow. She simply looked forward and let the moment unfold. Sometimes, victory does not roar. It breathes. It reminds the world that the most powerful sound on earth is the one that follows justice. Somewhere between the clouds and the fading light, the moment changed shape. The applause quieted into reflection, the kind that sinks into memory instead of echoing in air. Naomi leaned her head back against the seat, the hum of the engines steady beneath her. Around her, people were no longer staring at a spectacle, they were studying a truth. The captain's door opened slightly, and a flight officer stepped out, tall, young, nervous. "Miss Ellis," he said, his voice respectful but trembling. "The captain would like to personally apologize on behalf of our entire crew." Naomi nodded once. "He can do that right here." The officer disappeared, and moments later, the captain himself appeared in the aisle. His hat was in his hands. The lines on his face carried both exhaustion and sincerity. "Ma'am," he began, "I am deeply sorry. What you experienced does not represent who we are." Naomi met his gaze, calm but unflinching. "It represents exactly who you are, Captain. The question is whether it will continue to." The man swallowed, his eyes heavy with guilt. "I cannot undo what happened, but I will not let it happen again, not on my aircraft." Naomi studied him for a long moment, then said quietly, "Then start by knowing your silence carries weight. When you fly, you do not just carry passengers, you carry their dignity." The captain nodded slowly, then turned to face the cabin. His voice lifted, not as an announcement, but as an act of accountability. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Horizon Air, I want to acknowledge that what occurred earlier today was unacceptable. No one should ever be disrespected because of how they look, speak, or dress. We will do better." The passengers looked at one another, surprised. No airline speech had ever sounded like that. Naomi's eyes softened. It was not redemption, but it was a start. The captain bowed slightly before returning to the cockpit. The door closed with a quiet finality, but the cabin did not return to normal. It had been rewired. Miller, the young attendant, returned to Naomi's side. "Miss Ellis," she said hesitantly, "headquarters just sent an order. The staff at the terminal, the ones who insulted you, they have been removed from duty." Naomi inhaled, her voice calm. "Justice is not about removal. It is about re-education. Make sure they learn why it happened before they are replaced." Miller's eyes filled with something like respect. "You could have destroyed them, but you chose to teach." Naomi smiled faintly. "Destruction is easy. Correction takes power." A quiet descended again, heavier now, but gentler too. The passengers were no longer just witnesses, they were changed participants in a story that would follow them home. Naomi looked out at the sunset streaking the horizon. The sky had turned into molten gold, a fitting metaphor for transformation, something raw, refined by pressure. Her phone vibrated once more. Rachel's message appeared. "United Nations press conference requested. They want your statement on racial accountability and corporate policy." "Hi." Naomi typed her reply slowly. "Tell them I will speak, but not about race, about respect." She locked the screen and whispered to herself, "Power without empathy is just noise." But dignity changes the frequency of the world. Outside the window, the last edge of sunlight disappeared beneath the wing, leaving only the hum of progress. Night had settled over the clouds like a velvet curtain. The plane glided through darkness, the cabin lights dimmed to a golden hush. Most passengers had closed their eyes, but no one was truly asleep. The weight of what they had witnessed still floated in the air, quiet and undeniable. Naomi sat with her hands folded, gaze fixed on the window. Her reflection looked calm, almost serene, yet her mind replayed every second the slur, the silence, the awakening. She did not dwell on anger. She studied it, dissected it, turned it into purpose. A soft chime signaled a message from her assistant, Rachel. Headquarters has issued a public statement. They are calling for an emergency diversity summit. Naomi smiled faintly. It is not diversity they need, she whispered. It is decency. The man across the aisle, the same passenger who had spoken earlier, leaned forward. You know, I run a business too, he said quietly. We talk about equity all the time, but today I realized something. It is not just policy, it is personal. Ugh. Naomi nodded. Exactly. Change begins when comfort ends. He looked thoughtful. You think this will really make a difference? Naomi turned her eyes back to the window, where the faint glow of the city below began to appear. It already has. Every person who watched will carry it into their next decision. That is how movements begin, not with applause, but with awareness. The intercom crackled softly as the captain spoke again. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into New York. Current temperature is 72 degrees, and the local time is 9:32 p.m. Naomi exhaled slowly. The hum of descent felt different, lighter, freer. She whispered to herself, you can strip someone's title, question their place, even insult their skin, but you cannot erase what they have built. As the lights of the city came into view, a glow spread across the cabin. The boy from earlier pointed toward the window. Look, Mom, it is beautiful. His mother smiled. Yes, it is. Naomi looked out, her voice low but certain. Beauty happens when truth rises above the noise. The engines softened, the landing gear descended. The woman they had mocked hours earlier was now guiding a global conversation without shouting, without rage, only with grace wrapped in unshakable resolve. The world below was waiting. The wheels touched the runway with a soft thud, smooth and steady. The cabin filled with that brief moment of applause passengers often give when landing, but this time it sounded different, more like relief than habit. Naomi opened her eyes as the city lights of New York glimmered through the window, a constellation of movement and meaning. The captain's voice broke the silence. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. Thank you for flying with us. His tone carried humility, not routine. Naomi waited until the plane rolled to a stop at the gate. Around her, passengers gathered their belongings, some stealing glances at her, others smiling with quiet gratitude. She nodded politely to each, her composure never breaking. As the doors opened, a stream of warm air entered the cabin. The junior attendant, Miller, approached again, her voice trembling with sincerity. Miss Ellis, I just wanted to thank you before you leave. What you did, it changed how I see everything. I will not stay silent again. Naomi met her eyes, steady and kind. Then it was worth it, she said. Never let fear sound louder than fairness. When she stepped into the jet bridge, the first sound she heard was the echo of camera shutters. A small group of reporters stood behind the security line, their microphones ready, but no one dared to shout questions. They simply waited. Naomi paused for a moment, scanning the crowd. The flashing lights reflected off her orange blazer, the same one that had drawn ridicule hours before. Now it had become a banner of dignity. A reporter finally spoke. Miss Ellis, do you have a statement for the public? Naomi's answer was calm, measured. Yes. What happened today is not about one airport or one company. It is about what happens when people forget that respect is a universal language. Another question followed quickly. Will you restore the funding to Horizon Air? Naomi looked directly into the cameras. When they restore humanity to their culture, we will talk. How? Her words struck like a gavel. Reporters fell silent. The world had heard its verdict. Naomi turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, passengers from the same flight stopped to watch. The child waved shyly. The mother whispered, "Thank you." Naomi smiled softly and replied without turning around, "Do not thank me. Just keep your eyes open." The doors slid shut behind her, and the night swallowed the noise. Outside the terminal, the air was cool and alive with city noise. Car horns echoed from the pickup lanes, blending with the distant hum of traffic and the flicker of camera flashes that followed Naomi only for a moment before she waved them away. She did not crave attention. She commanded change. Her driver opened the door of a black sedan, but Naomi paused before entering. Across the street, she saw an airport janitor, a woman of color, pushing a mop bucket, tired but proud. Their eyes met briefly. Naomi nodded once, and in that single gesture, there was a whole conversation. "I see you. You matter." The janitor smiled faintly, her exhaustion softening into recognition. Naomi finally stepped into the car. As the city lights rolled past her window, her phone buzzed with another message from Rachel. "Every major outlet is calling this the most powerful act of silent resistance this year. You are trending worldwide." Naomi typed a short reply. "Let them trend the message, not the name." She closed the phone and leaned back against the seat. The driver glanced at her through the mirror. "Rough day, ma'am?" he asked gently. Naomi smiled, looking out at the skyline. "Necessary day," she said. "Some storms are meant to wash what people refuse to clean." The car stopped at a red light. On a nearby billboard, Horizon Air's logo still glowed proudly in the dark. Naomi looked at it for a long moment, her reflection merging with the brand that had once believed it owned the sky. She whispered, "Power is not what you hold over others. It is what you refuse to surrender when they try to strip it away." The light turned green. The city moved again. At her hotel, Naomi stepped out and turned to the driver. "Do me a favor," she said. "Next time you see someone being judged for how they look, do not look away." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Naomi walked through the revolving doors, her stride unhurried, her silence still commanding. The cameras had stayed behind, but the story was already everywhere across headlines, dinner tables, classrooms, and boardrooms. Before entering the elevator, she paused and looked directly at the reflection in the chrome panel before her. "They mocked me for flying